Hi, Trustee Browning. We do not have the owl, so, but you'll be able to hopefully hear me and I'll repeat questions for you from the room if you need. Okay. I'm going to turn this off until we start. So Hi, for those watching online, we are just going to give it another minute while folks settle into the room. Okay, great.
Oh, Bernie. So he said, oh, it's work.
We have food if you can.
Good, thank you. Thank you for the, nobody's putting by income limits, you know, I've seen those, except I found it very depressing that 100% of area median income for a single person is $125,000. How many single people?
Yeah.
So where do we need to take that? I know that is so. Before we start though, since we're together, all that on it. Yeah. I think it'd be great to do introductions for those, if you guys taking the time to hydrogen or having. There's one over here. They're not, is there, oh, there's two chairs right here. Bird and bite. Great. So if this is a workshop, it is not a meeting, so we're not taking minutes, there's no decisions to be made. There's a time for education and questions and discussion. Okay, so I think I'm Victoria Simonson, town administrator. Oh, sorry.
You've been on our server, you know.
What? I'm the current chair of the. I've been on the mission for maybe 2
I'm Lee Williams, I'm also on the PCDC, and I think I'm the newcomer.
There's Ian.
Great.
Oh, here we go. I'm Kay Sparks. I am the current chair of the Housing and Human Services Committee. I've been there. I think I'm closing in on my second.
I'm Debbie Scott, I'm on the PCDC. I'm the supervisor of the staff for the Housing and Human Services Commission.
I'm Jen Wingard, also on the PCDC, and I was on the IGAs.
I'm Julie Jacobs, formerly of HHSC and IGA and now PCDC. Claudia Keene, formerly of Parks and Rec and currently of Housing and Human Services Commission.
Ian Conley, on the Housing and Human Services Commission.
Rhonda Van Boss, Housing. Willa Fitzgerald, new to the Housing Commission.
Barney Drystad on PCDC, formerly on the Board of Trustees, and before that on the Economic Development Commission, now the Economic Vitality Commission.
Holly Rogan, Mayor, formerly of PCDC myself.
Nice. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Ritchie, town planner. So, and online we have,
Mark.
oh, you're still muted.
You talk slowly enough.
Are you able to unmute? Do you want to say hi?
You're muted.
Hello,
Go ahead.
from hot Austin, Texas. Okay.
Volume up.
Yes,
He
sorry.
said from Hot Austin, Texas.
Yeah,
And he is sitting in for trustee Dottie. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
For this month's meeting? Okay. All right, so thanks for getting everybody together. Tonight, we just, your memo had a lot of information. I'm just gonna do kind of a high-level overview tonight during the presentation, and then just here to answer any questions, share your thoughts with your trustee liaisons that are listening in as well. So give me a second, I'll share my screen. Can you all hear me okay, or do I need to use the microphone? We're good? Okay. Great. Okay. So as you can see, there's a lot happening around affordable housing at the local, state, and county level. So just a little level setting. I updated a few data points and pulled out some key data from the 2024 Housing Futures Plan. Obviously, we're not unique in this issue. It's national and regional. So we are working with many folks trying to understand how to face some of these challenges. In addition to what we're seeing nationally and regionally, we have additional challenges based on impacts from the flood, geographic constraints. We have lots of rocks and limited supply of buildable land, as well as a zoning scheme that favors single unit development. So lots of R1 zoning in town. Albeit we did, pass the recently adopted ADU ordinance, which allows ADUs throughout town. 82% of Lyons housing stock is owner occupied, which is on the high side for our peer communities in Boulder County, but not entirely unique. We have other communities with that ratio. On average, our renter population is considerably more cost burdened than our homeowners. And when we say cost burden, it just is a term that means households spend more than 30% of their income on housing. We're continuing to see housing values rise. I am kind of curious to see what happens this year. I think we might finally start seeing that slowdown in the increase, but you've seen even in the last 2 years, it continues to rise. Most people who live in Lyons work elsewhere, and most people who are employed in Lyons live elsewhere. For Lyons, that's particularly important because the types of jobs we have here in town typically can't afford the type of housing we have here in town. And our population is slightly decreasing as our community continues to age. And we are typical with other Boulder County communities. That's a trend we're seeing in Boulder County and in the state of Colorado. Just some data points here. The table is from the State Demography Office. It's generally more data driven than the census in terms of they look at building permits and they look at more pieces of data to come up with that. But generally, a lot of programs rely on census data. So I haven't dove in yet to try and understand why that number is fairly different, but it is what it is for now.
Can you talk about what group quarters population means?
Yeah, I think, and Victoria or anybody else in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that might be more like group homes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or- Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yep. And yeah, so just updating if folks were curious, these are the HUD maintained AMI limits, and they all vary based on size of household, type of bedrooms. And so you can see here the range from kind of a 20% AMI to 120% AMI. Obviously, Boulder County has high incomes, which the effect of this is that even some of our lower AMI properties are still effectively unaffordable to certain populations because our incomes are so high. We currently have, so I talked about this a little bit more in the memo, but there's a lot of ways to measure affordable housing. Some are naturally occurring affordable housing if the occupants happen to be able to afford it without a subsidy. Sometimes it requires deed restrictions, which guarantee that the cost of housing doesn't exceed a certain percentage of folks' income. So currently we have 72 deed restricted units in Lyons. We're going to have 9 more here really soon. We have 4. No, we have 2. We have 2, and then 9 more are going to be coming on, or 7 more are going to be coming on really soon. And then of the deed restrictions, those that I could validate, the AMI mix is between 30% and 80%. 6 of our deed restricted properties are home ownership. The remainder are all rental. And so if we look at the percentage of deed restricted properties in Lyons, depending on what you use for the housing unit base of the calculation, we have anywhere from 7.5 to 9.1% of our homes are currently deed restricted. Again, that's going to go up here slightly. Go ahead.
Does anybody have any idea that, our renters are more cost burdened?
Yes.
Is there a figure for that? Okay, 30%. So locally, are people spending 50%, 60%?
I could follow up on that. I do not know offhand. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that, Victoria. If you have any questions on any of these slides, though, please feel free to jump in. So getting into a little bit of what we've done here locally, as far back as 2016, the town adopted the 10% goal for local housing stock be affordable to residents earning 80% or less. 2017, all the communities in Boulder County signed on to the countywide goal of 12%. If you read the document, the priorities and strategies document, it talks a little bit about Ned and Lyons, due to their limited geography, have a little bit different way of looking at that. And you could argue that Lyons and Nederland have met the goal for our two communities that is set forth in there, but as a county, we are not there yet. And so more efforts are going to be required for that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Again, in our 2024 Housing Futures Plan, we talk a lot about housing and the impacts of lack of affordable housing in town. However, that plan did not set a target number for affordable units within our town. I'm not going to go through all these, but our Lions Thrive Comprehensive Plan had a number of policies that we need to consider related to affordable housing. It does discuss maintaining approximate 12% affordability locally. So we have kind of some varying numbers spread across our policies over the years, anywhere from 10 to 12%. Switching over to state now. So you probably heard of what we call Prop 123. It was approved by the Colorado voters in 2022, generates about $300 million in affordable housing funding. It has a lot of various programs, programs for developers, program for government, across the board, different types of programs. How this relates for the town of Lyons, in order for us to maintain eligibility to receive funds, we will have to increase our local affordable housing units by 10. By the end of 2026, we believe we're on track to do that with the 224 Seward project once BCHA kind of gets that into compliance with Prop 123. We also have the Carter Court lots that hopefully the board is in discussions and negotiations with BCHA on potentially providing those lots for affordable housing. So we feel pretty good about meeting that. In addition to those 10 units, we also, if we want to remain eligible, have to have fast track compliance in our land use decisions, which means from date of application to a decision of approval by whatever means that is, whether it's administrative or requires public hearings, we have 90 days to do that. There are opportunities for extensions to that 90 days. So, and if we maintain fast track compliance, we would be eligible for some more grants more easily. And then, so any question, I mean, we can talk more about that too as we go through, but staff also assumes that in addition to this 3-year cycle, there's going to be another round of, go ahead, Lisa.
Do those 10 units have to be completed?
Issue building permits. Yep. And they have to be 60% AMI less for rental or 100% AMI or less for ownership in order to qualify.
Just curious, in the different things, are there other definitions of affordability? I know we use income because it triggers on them. I'm just curious, just because we're not going to talk about values of this, but
Yeah.
there's just
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of the most standard use of affordability is that the cost of the home does not cost the household more than 30% of their income. So kind of across the board, I think that's probably the most uniform term for affordability I've heard. However, across the various programs, as you'll see, like Prop 123 wants 60% for renters and 100% for homeowners, and some of our policies, we want 80% AMI. So I think you really want to try and understand your local need, where your gaps are in your local housing stock, to try and make sure that you are filling the gap for the housing affordability that connects to your community, and that can really vary. And again, some communities, their price of housing might be low enough that they don't need a subsidy to meet that 30%, whereas I think Lyons and much of Colorado is not in that position. So that's kind of a long answer to what feels like should be a simple question. So again, we assume that even if we meet this commitment in the next 3 years, we're going to have additional commitments over, Prop 123. To date, we have not applied for funds under Prop 123. other Boulder County communities have, and they have received funds, so it's not out of the question that we might not decide to in the future. But to date, we have not. So in addition to the fast track and the 10 units, our Board of Trustees adopted a resolution earlier this year that elected to pursue a number of strategies to meet the goals of Prop 123. They're all on here. So far, we've got the ADUs as a use by right, so that's done. Expedited development review, we're working on through our fast track work, and these are just things to keep in mind as we have conversations with folks interested in housing. All right, so any other questions on Prop 123 before we switch off to the next one? Okay, we can come back. So in 2024, the Colorado's legislature passed Senate Bill 24-174 titled Sustainable Affordable Housing. Town of Lyons is subject to this law. Very small communities and communities with declining populations over a 10-year period are not subject to this law, but the state considers us subject to it. The first step in the law requires adoption of a housing needs assessment. And unfortunately, a number of communities all got grants a few years ago to do our housing plans, and the criteria for those housing plans did not match the criteria in this new state law. So all the work that most all the communities did a few years ago under that IHOP program is no longer eligible for the new. And really, it requires a lot more analysis on like visitability and accessibility and locally tailoring your affordability to the need in your community. So I don't necessarily think that the new criteria is problematic. It's just more complicated. So the Dr. Cog, who you may have heard of, Denver Regional Council of Governments, is a regional planning entity. They did a housing needs assessment actually in advance of the state law that they worked with DOLA, the state of Colorado, to get that, what we call the RHNA, in compliance with the state law. And so all communities that are within the Dr. Cog area can sign on to that HNA in place of doing their own. Towns have a 60-day window that I believe opened this week today. And so that's going to be considered by the board, hopefully at a meeting here in August. And then that would relieve us from having to do a local one. In response to the RHNA, we have to do a housing action plan, which basically says Town of Lyons commits to do X, Y, and Z in order to try and achieve the housing needs assessment. I don't believe the action plan obligates us to a certain number of units. I think it obligates us to strategies and actions to get there. But we're waiting on guidance from DOLA for that. And finally, it also includes a water supply, strategic growth element, but I'm not as familiar with the guidance from DOLA on that. And we have another 1.5 years on that. So go ahead.
Curious.
Yeah.
Would our action plan be dictated by the housing needs assessment or just in light of it?
So to be clear, and I don't know, for those of you that clicked on some of the hyperlinks, the housing needs assessment does actually assign a number to Lyons. It is in the low hundreds, I want to say 119, thank you, Victoria, across a range of AMI. So 119 units across the affordability spectrum. The thing that's not clear to me is kind of when the clock starts, if you will, on those 119 units. The Dr. Cog HNA was completed in 2023. As you know, we've had some units come online since then. So I think there's still a lot of questions for a lot of staff, but it will assign Lyons a number. And then the action plan, again, I think is not a commitment to build the units, but a commitment to do the efforts that could result in the units. That's my understanding, but I think it's still a lot of TBD. Do you know more on that?
I know.
Your role?
Yeah, I know a little bit more. So I attend the Dr. Cog meetings and have for years. And my understanding is that the strategies that the board has already adopted apply. So we may not need to do anything else. And I'll just say that
As an action plan?
as an action plan.
Great.
We'd need to verify
Yeah,
that with
fair.
DOLA. And, I think that this bill put DOLA on its heels a little bit. Everybody's sort of building the plane as it's flying. So there are a lot of unknowns, and we are not the only municipality in this particular boat, to mix metaphors.
As I understand it, Longmont is not signing on to the regional housing needs assessment. They do plan to be doing their own and all of the necessary analysis. My understanding is the remainder of the Boulder County communities are going to present the regional HNA to their boards and councils. And so we'll see where that goes. So if we sign on to the regional, I don't think we're going to be alone in Boulder County going in that path, but that's all TBD over the next 60 days. Yeah.
Question related to when information is presented as Boulder County, whatever, does that mean specifically Boulder County unincorporated or all of Boulder County, including the municipalities within?
That's a good clarification. In the example I just said, I mean, all the municipalities with the exception of Longmont, but I'll do my best to try and clarify when I'm using that term, Boulder County.
Yeah, and part of it, to me relates to housing goals.
Mm-hmm.
So do the units in Lyons that are achieved over time count toward Boulder County objectives, or no, because the Boulder County objectives are only unincorporated?
I would say both. I think for the 12% countywide goal, yes. So the county itself doesn't have I think their policy is not to actually build a lot of housing in unincorporated. So I think their goal is to have that 12% be primarily located in the communities. So the 12% countywide goal, ours would count. But Boulder County has its own Prop 123 goals, and Lyons would not count toward those, I don't believe.
Well, the reason for bringing it up is to the extent that actions taken for Lyons with the units in Lyons, to what extent would we look to Boulder County for help?
I would say quite a bit. So for example, if BCHA, which is the Boulder County Housing Authority, builds units in Lyons, Lyons could count those for our Prop 123 goal, right? And then again, they would go toward the county goal of the 12% affordability. And in some cases, maybe BCHA as an organization is using funds from the state that would meet, maybe one of their own goals. So I think it could be a mix based on funding source and what goal they're trying to achieve.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So getting into that, Boulder County initiatives, as we talked about previously in 2017, all the local governments in the county signed on to 12% be affordable countywide. So it didn't necessarily, if you read the language of that, the communities explicitly did not say in their resolutions that 12% will be affordable in their communities. So I think there's some varying degrees of support across the jurisdictions for how much needs to be in their local. But last year, all of the staff in all the communities did their best to try and tally deed restricted affordable units within the communities. And so there's a dashboard published on the Town of Erie's website right now. And we're at about halfway through our goal based on permits issued in 2024 or permits in the pipeline. So about halfway there as a county, still a long way to go. Lyons, I think, is again anywhere from 7.5% to 9%, depending on kind of what the bottom line of that ratio is you're looking at. In 2023, voters in Boulder County passed the Affordable and Attainable Housing Tax, generates approximately $16 to $17 million annually. Of that, 35% go towards supportive services, and then 65% go toward the development of new affordable housing units, 30% to Longmont, 32% to the city of Boulder, 38% for the remainder of the Boulder County communities, and the town administrators, town managers, city managers form the committee that recommend the non-Boulder and Longmont allocation to the Boulder County commissioners, which in 24, the town of Lyons received $900,000 that will be funneled through BCHA, again, for Carter Court and for Seward. We do believe that 900,000, we probably can't expect that amount of money every year. So it will get more competitive as the communities get more organized around receiving these funds. So we kind of snuck in a little easy on this first year because we had projects that were a little ready to go. But, and it's also, as we know, over allocated, like every fund is. Everybody has more projects than that fund can hit. Go ahead.
Authority, do they have plans for updating or what's happening?
So the Board of Trustees, BCHA made a presentation to the board in May, I believe, about a concept for Carter Court. The board was supportive of continuing that conversation. So BCHA, through their development partners, is doing kind of test fits on the Carter Court lots to understand, maybe what setbacks might work and how many units would fit, how they do parking. We are planning, I believe, on August 18th. We tentatively, I think, are hoping we can get an update to the board on that work. And then the Seward project, we have met with BCHA a couple times. They have allocated 200,000 for kind of pre-development planning. So trying to evaluate the zoning code, what the appropriate zone district or PUD might be. But that is really just to cover kind of legal costs and staff time. And we have not heard an update based on our initial meetings. But those properties are occupied. And so we want to be, we want to be thoughtful about what we do on Seward and make sure it accommodates them. Go ahead.
What's the cost per unit in? So right now, according to Dr. Denver Regional Council of Governments, 18% of households in Lyons are spending between 30 and 49% of their income on housing. And we have another 9% that are spending more than 50% of their income on housing. So 27%, quarter of more. That's a whole.
That's a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, David.
All right. So finally, this is my last slide, I'm pretty sure. Local grants. So the town of Lyons and some of our partners have gotten a number of grants over the last few years. We have a grant with DOLA for a joint housing coordinator with the town of Nederland. It's $200,000. Ned is the lead recipient, and they have secured their match in the last few weeks. So they're going to be hiring for that hopefully soon. So we'll be getting some assistance with tracking and overseeing and managing efforts related to housing over the next few years. Through DOLA, again, we got a grant to explore the creation of a multi-jurisdictional housing authority. Gilpin County is the lead on that. So we have Central City, Blackhawk, Gilpin County communities, and town of Nederland and the town of Lyons on that. A consultant that's knee-deep in looking at different options, funding streams, different structures, and there's going to be an update before the board on August 4th for that. So if you're curious, you can look for that packet. And finally, we have a $1 grant for Prop 123 fast track compliance to help all the communities kind of evaluate what's required under fast track, look at our local codes for barriers and obstacles, kind of our development review process, and Boulder County is the lead grant recipient on that. Work is underway, and we have a tremendous consultant team, so we're really lucky on that project. I'm excited. In addition to fast track compliance, I think it's also going to look at just kind of best practices related to development review and kind of not just fast track, but how we can support efforts related to housing and where our codes might be a barrier. Fast track. Best track. There you go. I like that. That's all I have. I know there was a lot of information in the memo, but we're really just here to kind of hear from you, share your thoughts with the board, what questions you have. I don't know if, go ahead.
I do have an observation and question.
Yep.
From early in the presentation when it talks about population.
Yeah.
And the the notion that most of the people in Lyons work outside of Lyons. And people who work in Lyons come from outside.
Mhm.
But there's a lot more to it than that. And I think we should try to dig down a little further and enrich that information because we have a good number of retirees. And we also have a good number of people who work from home.
Yep.
And many of the people who work from home get their paycheck from outside of town.
True.
But there are some who are self-employed and in effect, they get their. I think we may want to have a little more knowledge about that perspective overall, because I think the housing needs are a little different.
Yep.
And it's not only selling new houses to new people coming to town, there are also the needs for people to go through life stages within town.
Great point.
And I think having a little more information around those perspectives would be useful.
I appreciate you saying that, and I think there's a lot to dive into. You're right, like as our community ages, as we all know, that's the demographic. Do we have the types of housing that older adults would like to move into, or do they have to leave our community? And, in other communities I've worked in, that's a community value that we've talked about. Is that a value as a community that we're fine with certain types of folks, they have a household challenge and the answer is they have to leave Lyons, or do we want to try and meet that need locally? So I think that's a really good point. If we decide not to do the regional housing needs assessment, the local housing needs assessment would force us to really do deep dives into all of that. I would say we don't have anything budgeted or allocated for some of the support work that would be needed to understand that data, but I do appreciate that. Go ahead.
And he would, Barney would know, a couple years ago, we were involved in, I can't remember what it was PCDC, and we talked about, and we created a survey for employers and employees about just because people work here and live elsewhere, maybe they're perfectly happy.
Right.
So we want to find out. Did that survey get done? Did we have anything?
I know there was a survey that the residents did last year, but I don't know businesses.
I don't think it did.
That was short-term rental subcommittee.
Oh,
So task force that just kind of spun out of scope control and started doing.
okay.
Policy. They're just reviewing policies and it's a hard question to answer. So
Yeah.
they started reaching out to different ideas and that was something that gained traction.
No, you're not wrong. I mean, I don't live in Lyons and I would love to live in Lyons, but I'm probably not moving here, but it doesn't mean I won't continue to work here. So you're right. Not every household maybe that works here wants to live here or can live here, but understanding kind of the desire and the barriers, I think is good information for communities to have. Go ahead.
Using that, say, simple.
Yeah.
Tool.
Yeah.
But it also misrepresents the situation sometimes. I think it's worth using most of the time, many times, but it's a county-wide area median income.
Yep.
And that income may differ from Lyons or from the outskirts of Lyons.
Totally.
There are lots of ways that might not be representative of our situation, right?
And as we know, there's some really high incomes that we believe we're probably skewing this even higher,
It's a median.
Yeah, but yeah. I know that's been a conversation with the city of Boulder because they are seeing challenges and actually leasing up certain income spectrums. And do we come up with our own more locally based formula that can get calibrated differently?
And there are people who think about gaming the equation.
Yeah.
By putting lots of affordable housing in the more rural parts of the county where it's less expensive to do. And where it's actually matched up with much lower incomes. And we find ourselves sort of in between that tension. We're not Ned and we're not Allen's Park, but we're also not City of Boulder.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Similar question, or similar vein question. Does Lyons define affordable housing by percent of AMI here?
Our housing futures plan says affordable housing is 80% or less, if I remember right, and then attainable is 80 to 120. So 100% for home ownership, 60% for rental.
So this has been a point of contention, talking about this. We
Yep.
don't know what we're saying when we say affordable.
Yep.
We don't differentiate usually between rentals and ownership either.
Yeah.
And I think there should be some policy.
Okay.
Whether it's baked into our code or not, I don't know, but that'd be something, you know, board trustees can maybe give us direction on if you want to try to figure out what that is for Lyons. But it's kind of related to what Lee says, you know, is Lyons the same as Boulder County? I don't know.
I would assume it's not.
And again, we could pick a number and simplify our thinking and our discussions. But the more complicated way to do it, which might reflect reality a little better, is to know that we have this whole range. That we want to be able to accommodate people who need 30 and 40 and 50 and 60 and 80. But we also want to be a thriving community that can accommodate 100 and 120.
Mhm.
So rather than say, we're working on 80. My inclination when I'm thinking about it is to say, let's make sure we have that full ladder available to people. Let's see what's missing in it and try to work the niches that are missing.
And our Dr. Cog regional housing needs assessment numbers for Lyons, do they reflect that? So they have kind of the need for, like, I believe it's 50% or less, and that's actually, according to that needs assessment, is our highest need of those 119, and it goes up to 120, and then I think there's even some after that. So again, to your point, I see both sides. I would hate to have a definition that would prevent a project from coming into our community that, you know, could fill a need if we say, well, we don't need that, or that doesn't meet our code. So I think based on the variety of types of funding out there, the different criteria that all those funding sources have, I see both sides to, you know, I think the big key is understanding our local context and, you know, and then being able to adapt, to your point, as projects come in. Go ahead.
And I think board trustees sort of address that in that. While looking at affordability and summit and different things like that, then balancing that with, let's see what comes down the road and then look at that through community needs, some nice facts and figures. So that's not eliminating anything. But
Do you want to
knowing we
explain?
had, and like remembering it right, there was a really good discussion about let's just see what comes down the road as well as
Right.
make our plans.
We decided that we were gonna take an opportunistic approach to housing affordability. That's what this board settled on. So, and the Seward project is a great example of that, as is Carter Court. So it remains in one of the board's priorities. It remains in our priority list, but we're being opportunistic about it, which thus far has worked to our advantage.
And Carter will potentially introduce two home ownership options.
BCHA is exploring home ownership. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which again, as I mentioned, yeah, at least 4 units probably. Yeah. Again, we have 6, you know, the habitat development is the home ownership, affordable home ownership. But other than that, the remainder of our deed restricted are all rental. So I think getting that home ownership project, generational wealth creation, all of that there's a lot to be said for that. Trustee Browning, do you have questions or comments? I'm happy to repeat them back.
Is he still in?
He is still here. Let me,
Do you want, maybe if you stop screen sharing?
No, it's a very interesting discussion. One thing that I wanted to throw out in the mix, and it goes back to one of the earliest. Can you hear me?
yeah, can't hear you. I'm just trying to figure out how to, I need
Maybe-
to share my other screen if
The
I,
microphone up.
oh, there we go. Okay. Try that.
Yeah, one thing that I would like to throw out in the mix and get the reactions and input from both the PCDC and the HHSC about is one of the earliest figures you mentioned, and it's in, I think, the Housing Futures Plan, is that we have like 82% of the housing in Lyons is owner occupied, which is a real imbalance. We can talk all we want to about rents and income levels and stuff, but when you have such a limited supply of rental property and such a high demand, because Lyons is a good, desirable place to live, question is, should we look at increasing the supply in terms of rental units, even if it's market rate? And what I'm thinking about is we have the back 3 acres at the Tebow property roughly. We're looking at the Lucanen property. They've expressed an interest in also annexing. And those are both fairly large properties by Lyons standards anyway. And I just throw that out there to increase the supply side, I guess the 18% that's rental property now. What do we think about market rate rentals, or probably more desirable, a mix of market rate and attainable or affordable if you can find a developer willing to do that? But what if a developer comes along in the future and says, I'm willing to do 100 market rate units on one of these large properties, and that will increase your basic rental supply by basically double it, I think, so close to that. Is that something
Sure.
you're
So
interested in or not? I don't know.
I'm going to try and summarize your question for the room
Yeah.
because we're
Okay, sorry.
having trouble hearing. My microphone on my computer's not that loud. So his question is more around what do we think as a community around increasing our overall supply of market rate housing that's rental, even if it's not affordable, just to try and kind of counteract that 82% home ownership number to get a more balanced housing supply for a rental opportunity, even if it's not affordable. And I mean, I think that's my personal opinion is that's something that the town should consider if and when a proposal comes in, because there is a school of thought that just the overall housing supply is impacting affordability too. So more units, and we've seen that in some communities as numbers of units have come online. I think Denver has even seen that in recent years where rents will stabilize when they see a big push of rental units come on. So I think some of it depends on the type of product. Is it a really high-end luxury type apartment? Is it more of a, moderate type of product? So I think it should be, again, to the mayor's point, my opinion would be kind of an opportunistic look at it, but I'm not sure if anybody else has thoughts or opinions on that.
Well, I'm wondering about the Lions Valley Village spot, on Second Avenue that was built quite a while ago. And that's kind of a communal living situation, but those are owned. It's home ownership, and they were affordable. They were affordable. They're still relatively affordable. So that kind of project seems to work pretty well. Just because, if you can encourage that kind of development, that would be another really good.
They're good option.
Yeah, I think another benefit of sort of mixed market and subsidized market being looked at together makes a lot of sense, because you don't want to develop only low income or low price housing together and sort of separate that from the rest of the community. And there are negatives to that, and there are also negatives that we've seen in terms of reaction of building palaces in neighborhoods that are otherwise not palaces. And so I think the notion of planfully looking at developments in a mixed way makes a lot of sense, and I think it's beneficial for the community.
I think that's a good point. And when you think about the tools that communities will use for affordable housing, one of them is what called an inclusionary housing ordinance, which if you do get a development, say, that has more than 10 units, it requires a certain percentage to be affordable. And I don't know, is that something Lyons has considered? I don't know the background on IHOs.
Yeah, the boards that I've been on have not considered that, simply because there hasn't really been an opportunity for a large development like that.
Yeah.
With the Tebow annexation, it might be something to consider now.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'll say real quick is one of our friends at DOLA last year gave me the heads up and said, people are going to start building a lot fewer apartment buildings over the next couple of years. the market is being saturated. And so once the current developments are complete and people have moved in, there won't really be the demand for apartments statewide that's been seen, which might be good for us.
Sure.
Given the Tebow annexation, we might wind up having a choice of projects.
No, but I was saying, somebody in this would be part of them. I'm not good in the area of ordinance, but they did put in the text. Of PUD that. To something about affordable housing, which is going to allow some housing development to be built there, so that was in the text, it wasn't ever applied. It was in the text part of the PUD, so, I mean, it's almost been taken years earlier and with the prior board, I mean, so it's kind of inclusionary, but it'll,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, my experience, I teach at CU, I got the planning stuff there, I practice. I'm not an expert, so I'll just see what the awesome profiles. Very few projects actually take advantage of the inclusionary requirement. You almost always have the option to pay the offer to offset it.
Yep.
The problem with mine is we don't have it where that to go. We have
That's right.
one.
Yep.
It's the same problem with deed restricted properties. We don't have to manage staff burden. So I kind of feel like one of our first steps should be having an agreement in place with the housing authority so that we can possibly help us.
We actually have the structure for that in Boulder County set. So the city of Boulder and the communities that are closer to having some units that are not managed by BCHA have signed an IGA. So the city of Boulder staff has actually agreed to help support the local government communities. And then that's also one of the options that the multi-jurisdictional housing authority could provide if that gets established as an ability for kind of a joint oversight of compliance. So, but you're right, it's certainly a barrier as we think about bringing units in. And I think to some degree under state law, you have to give a fee in lieu option for an IHO to be, fully compliant, inclusionary housing ordinance, but some communities prefer the fee in lieu. I know Boulder, I think, kind of encourages developers to pay into the fee in lieu, whereas some communities, I think their local preference is to build units on site. So, and generally what you want to do if you do an inclusionary is you want to do a little bit of a market analysis so that you don't set the number so high that you're effectively not going to get anything, right? Because if communities are too aggressive on their IHO, the developers are like, well, I can't afford 20% or 30%, so they don't build anything. So I think if you go down that path, you have to be pretty thoughtful with calibrating it and then setting your fee in lieu equivalent. So some not taken lightly, but not also, a lot of communities do it. So it's something to consider.
I would add, I think from an housing assessment, although it wasn't perfect, I think the number one need was 1 bedroom. For rent. And I think kind of living here for so long. That's the head starting. If that's
Okay.
so. I think market rate. And maybe make sure if you can figure out how to do that. Would be so great for that. And then just on the inclusionary zoning stuff.
Yeah.
So I work for a large home builder and
Yeah.
we're partnering with Elevation Community Land Trust, a statewide trust. To have them purchase the 12% of 100 homes we're doing in Denver. So that those stay permanently affordable. That's an ownership model, but there are some different ways to do that, but I agree, we haven't had this development. I don't think that makes sense yet.
I think one thing is potential. A really good adjacent to the presented to the Board of Trustees.
Quite a while ago. Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that.
No, it was presented as 25 to 27. 1 bedrooms, 2-story, parking underneath, 1 story above. And I got the feeling it was workforce. It was
Looking at Victoria on this one, I don't know.
It was a really cool presentation. It was just like, are you guys interested in that? It was kind of full blown.
It wasn't a proposal or it wasn't an application. It was an idea.
It says that it's like 5 was it? Oh, that takes care of that.
It's a development arm spin-off studio show. PCDC. I don't think they didn't go to the board just about, they just were like, if we're breaking up by with you guys, I was wondering if you would be interested in that. It's like a workshop basically.
Okay,
The land costs gonna be.
Yeah.
A big part to making it naturally occurring. And I think if the town does have a parcel, large enough to provide some level of density and optimization, that's another way. Some municipalities are trying to work themselves.
it's a good point. And often as we see the easy land to build on gets built on, right? Because developers, that's just what's left over are similar like the lots on Carter Court, right? So those are compromised lots that require bigger investment. So, but to your point, using town-owned land is a really great strategy to cover that cost.
What I'd be curious to know is if we have a sense as a town, whether or not we can create these units opportunistically as they come, right? Working with local partners. Is that possible, or do we need matching dollars or grant dollars for Prop 123 and other, where we really do need to meet certain metrics that we need to define? So it's like, we don't want to define an AMI because we just want to deal with projects one at a time as they come and work with our partners. But if we don't follow some of the rules that have been laid out for us to receive these grants, then can we even afford to do it on our own? And to the land cost thing, I mean, if we can land bank, that helps us create these projects where maybe they couldn't otherwise be created. And I just don't know if we have a sense as a town yet, whether or not we can afford to do this on our own, or if we really do need those grant dollars to help us get there.
I think it depends on the project. So I think, for example, like the Carter Court lots, if through the town deeding the land to BCHA, just that enough of a subsidy and then meeting the 100% ownership criteria under Prop 123, I think additional subsidy locally from like building permit fee rebates, it appears like that project probably won't need much deeper subsidy than that. However, that's 100% AMI project for small units, right? I'm looking at Lee, like if you have like a 30% AMI you're trying to hit, you are absolutely going to be looking at a combination of a capital stack, right? Like a LIHTC tax credit and maybe a land dedication and water rights or fee waivers. Other deals and communities I've worked on have required multiple capital or offsets in order to achieve a project. So I think it depends on, but do you want to? Yeah.
Push.
Yeah.
But I also smiled a little bit when you said at 100%, if we give them the land.
Yeah,
and
it's still a lot. Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
And we're, then we could probably do it. So
There's still a lot, yeah.
that's-
Mhm. Yeah.
So I feel like we don't decide. It seems like at some point we have to decide our decisions aim towards trying to receive as much matching either now or in the future grant dollars to make this engine work. Or are we happy just kind of going on our own, dealing with local partners to try to make these projects? Because I don't like the fact that we don't have an AMI defined land use code. I feel like it creates problems. It's also, it could be limiting in the
Yeah.
future, so I understand that part too. But if we're not trying to like work towards some sort of grant program or some sort of dollars out there, I just don't know if we are gonna be sustainable in this effort. It's just a personal fear.
No, I think that's a really reasonable comment. I mean, I know with like a LIHTC deal, which is federal tax credits, state tax credits, you need to have like a 60%. So,
So I think the developer, it's in it, it's not the municipal incentive.
correct. Usually it's
Yeah,
whoever's,
talking about-
well, it's whoever's developing the project. So like if a housing authority is doing it, they could get the tax credit, but no, generally the developer is the applicant for that. But I do know like under Prop 123, sometimes it needs to be like the local government needs to, and then you have to structure a pass through to the developer. So,
To
Yeah.
these points, You do, or you don't? We do. We can figure it out.
Mhm.
We don't. That seems like. I think the project does, and maybe we
Yeah.
drive it, or maybe a private developer drives it, or a profit drives
Yeah.
it, or CDP drives it. I think the project is money.
And I think it varies. I've worked where I've had private developers approach me and say, I've been looking at this piece of land and I've got this deal that I can do because this piece of land works for my project. And that was not on my radar. And then I've also had it where like, no, we as a town are very actively targeting a project. So I've actually, like, I've seen it get built both ways too. So, I bet I hear you and I agree, having like local understanding of what we're looking for and our need is super important, but it's I would hate to preclude something.
And if I, can I add
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah,
to
yeah.
that? So I understand the desire to memorialize AMI in the code. One of the challenges in doing that is circumstances change. So for example, 2025 is far different from 2017 when it comes to the housing landscape in the state overall. And changing code obviously can be done, but if it is a number that is likely to evolve over time, having it codified might not make the most sense.
So that's the part where you really could be tied to housing resources, CHFAs, because they are supposed to scale in time, so you don't need to really do it. I know it's a fun issue, but you're not saying it's this many dollars, you're saying it's this percent of it.
The AMI, right?
Yeah.
I don't.
To the degree we do have it though, like as I mentioned, the housing futures policy, says 80% AMI is affordable in lands, right? So that is probably, it does not clarify the difference that I can recall, but that is probably the closest that I've seen in terms of like a locally adopted policy for what affordable means, but wouldn't call that regulatory.
I mean, the chart you showed before, right? I think it said 60% AMI of 1 bedroom was 1,600 something. We
Probably.
need like 50 of those.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes it's just cut through.
Which kind of one of my personal pet peeves as a planner is the fact that we use dwelling units per acre as a metric when a 1-bedroom apartment has a fundamentally different impact on a community than a single family home with a giant yard and a bunch of irrigation. But I don't necessarily have the answer for how to fix it. But to your point, sometimes we arbitrarily limit ourselves based on zoning when maybe, 3 apartments is equivalent to like a 1-bedroom house. So in terms of impact on a community. So just something to think through as we think about policies moving forward.
Have experience with what I've been saying, you guys have been saying in terms of we need so many little pieces to come together to make this work. Does a community need to have this semi in place to get that developer? I mean, can you do this kind of thing on the fly? Somebody comes to you and says this and you're like, okay, we're so far short, we need and we do it. And I'm just thinking in the housing commission, housing human services, do we need to get our act together now? And get some kind of group together? I have no concept whatsoever and very little knowledge. But do we need to be ready for it? Or do we just need to sort of, well, it happens, and if it doesn't, well.
I mean, I don't know what you would say, but
Yeah.
I think opportunistic strategy, you're gonna get little projects here and there. But if you want something bigger at scale, you're gonna have to do the groundwork.
Together, be intentional.
Yeah.
Get an infrastructure grant from DOLA and
Yeah.
put out a request for proposal for a developer.
I think you're right. I think one of the things that's been challenging in my personal experience over the last 10 years working in communities in Boulder County is the big towns have a lot of structure around this. They have a lot of staff, they have a lot of resources, they maybe have tax measures that have been in place, right? So you look at like Boulder and Longmont, like they're light years ahead and they have been really addressing this as a countywide. I think the small communities, we're not unique at all. I think in our Boulder County peers for small communities in our just from like a staff understanding of how to do this, the community's understanding of what affordable housing is and why we all need it. I think that's shifted a lot in the last 5 years. And I think the other challenge, frankly, has been the amount of state legislation that is coming at communities so fast that we're having a hard time being strategic and long-term because we're reacting every year to whatever new state law is coming at us. So, but I do think having like a little bit of a strategic plan, if there's community support for like, we want this type of project in this location, I think if, to your point, if everybody kind of knows and we're all pushing the, the train in that direction, I think the likelihood of achieving it would be way higher than just lucking into it.
And can I add?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that? So, and I want to reiterate that the majority of the board was of the opinion that we should not actively pursue new opportunities and consider them when they come to us. That was the majority of the board's decision. And so I think that if there were an idea for a project that we could go and see if we could find community support for it, if the community demonstrated that overwhelmingly demonstrated that support, I believe the board would consider being proactive about a project, but I just don't kind of want to get anybody's hopes up for some big, well, and but that's right. Boards change over time, and their composition changes over time, and priorities change over time.
Follow-up question to that delay. Since the housing needs assessment, the one we've already done, but then also the one that's being done by Dr. Potter on behalf. And they say we need to add additional units. Bohannon and Houston couldn't answer this clearly. I'm not sure, like, or what. Like, and so if we don't add the 150 units,
Yeah.
I even asked this explicitly. Like, if you don't build this many units over this period of time, the average house price and rent price will increase, right? So if you wanted to stay where it is, you build those units.
I get asked that question a lot. That's a hard question to answer because it requires a little bit of prediction and crystal ball that we don't have the benefit of. I think over time, you see the composition of your communities change. I think you're at higher risk for displacement. You're at higher risk for, keeping your local businesses supported, and I think about some of our mountain communities. I remember talking to the planner in Crested Butte. He was like, I have one rental in my entire community, and I have a whole seasonal summer workforce with nowhere to live. And that's an extreme example, but it's a tough question to answer. Like, it's hard to say, like, if you don't do this, you will absolutely experience X or Y or Z, but I think there's trends.
Well, I think we need to
Yeah.
ask what
Okay. Yeah.
Feels like someone thinks.
I think it's a really good point. I think it's very good.
And I think that's actually the basis for for the lawsuit that's been filed and the number of lawsuits that will likely be filed over the next year or so. And it's one of the challenges with the state laws pertaining to housing is there are so many, and some of them conflict with each other, and nobody knows what's going to happen with all the court cases. And so I think many communities are just sort of saying, whoa, we're gonna wait and see how all this plays out. So we're not gonna do what you tell us to do.
But to your point, I think education, the communities in Lyons, I think, is ahead of a lot of communities because of the flood. I think you all were forced to have this conversation probably a little bit in advance of some of our peer communities after COVID, when we saw prices really spike. But I think education, awareness of what is the local need, like, I think it's a kind of a multi-faction strategy. But to your point, like, what happens if you don't do it? We should be able to answer that better.
So I have a question that goes way back to before the flood.
Mhm.
I lived here, and now, when we say we're gonna build 61 bedrooms, is that for the 250 people that don't live here now that just love this place and want to move here? Or is that for my friends that work here who pay $2,000 for a studio and share it with a person that they're not related to or sleeping with? Right? So that, like, how does that ever get addressed? And we've talked about this a lot during the IGA meetings. If you build it, they will come. Well, what if we want the people here who are living over in the confluence that are paying a ton, renting a house that they could never afford?
Mhm.
Or the retired person like me, who maybe wants to downsize someday and never will be able to live here. I'll have to move.
Yep.
I mean, what, how does that come into all of this?
That's tricky because under federal law and Fair Housing Acts, we're somewhat limited to the degree we can say you can live here and you can't. Local preferences are tricky, you know, age, there are some provisions for age restriction. To the degree, I mean, you all did that to some degree with Lions Valley Townhomes. I know Victoria's team worked really hard with trying to prioritize first lease up for folks impacted by the flood. It takes more effort to identify folks and get them into the system earlier, and then to some degree, we're impacted by fair housing. Anybody, I don't know if,
If
go ahead, yeah.
a project that we're gonna lend it. The pit, and then that gave the commissioners the ability and lottery to prioritize.
Yeah, that's.
Mhm. Some of it depends on where you're getting funding too. If you're getting funding from a certain type of, you know, for federalizing a project or you're not, right? So there's some degree of variability, I think, to the degree you can control that.
Yeah, and then the taxation right now in Colorado, and then the insurance because of fires and floods. I mean, you feel for landlords, but you still wouldn't want the landlords asking $2,000 for a studio, you know, in Lions, but it's the way it is. I'm saying for our businesses, not just for our homes.
So we're just gonna wait for a developer who wants to develop something so that people who already live here don't have to leave. That's our.
Well, to me, it's a function of access, right? That's kind of the whole point of what we're talking about. There's the more units that are available, the more opportunity there will be for certain populations to move into the town that had not previously existed. Right? Because we can't say like, you can't live here. But I think, yeah, just.
And then when you move it from somebody else.
Right.
It's same.
To the degree you can also utilize other tools, right? Like to the degree we could amend our zoning code, right? Like we know 1-bedroom units are in, you know, higher supply. Like how could we amend rather than maybe like predicting what financial strategy might work? You know, there's some other tools that we could look at that could make it easier to develop the type of units to fill in that gap that might not necessarily require financial subsidy. So there's a lot of strategies we could look at.
Was there ever any opportunity to work with the hotel developers to do a combination of housing and hotel?
I'm looking at Victoria on that one, if you know.
There was a proposal at one time for some small units downtown near the hotel so that hopefully workers could live near where they work. But then as that was put on hold, it kind of just nothing's.
Is the hotel still moving forward?
As of right now, they say they are still committed, yes.
Go ahead.
If we were to not accept or adopt the Dr. Cog housing assessment and conduct another one on our own to meet this, could we, I'd be interested to know if there's enough room in there to like study something specific that's like the questions that are being answered being asked right now.
I mean, I do think we would miss out on kind of forcing ourselves to do a lot more locally based research and updating of the 23 housing needs assessment that we did. And yeah, and nothing would say we can't also do that if we sign on to the regional. But the regional is because I think the justification for, and you might know this, that for not doing some of the deep dives locally around accessible units and all that was just because they couldn't access that amount of data that was needed. Whereas I think they expect the locals maybe could access that data. So I don't know, is that kind of your understanding on that?
Yeah, I don't have any more insight into.
Okay. But there could be some, again, we'd have to probably identify budget and some assistance or rely on the local new housing coordinator a little bit. But we'd learn a lot more.
I know it's seems like that's the question that wants answering and can't be answered easily by a consultant.
Yeah. Any other questions from the group? Any other opinions you'd like to share with your trustee liaisons? All right, well,
Trustee Brown,
oh, go ahead.
you're still muted.
You're still muted. There you go.
I just want to remind people that the existing Board of the Trustees and prior ones are acting under a constraint that was codified after the 2015 housing issue, which is we cannot use any of our parks and open space land that the town owns more than half acre at a time without voter approval. And that's a
Good
big
point.
constraint. And so when we talk about land banking and the town using its land resources to make housing available, that was a voter imposed constraint that we have to live under. And that does limit our opportunities.
So for those of you who couldn't hear, he just wanted to remind us all that our code has a limit on rezoning land that's zoned as park without a vote of the residents. So if the property is more than half an acre in its own park, you cannot rezone it to another zone district without a vote. So to the degree we own a lot of land that is zone parked, we can't use that for housing unless there's, to your point, broad community support. Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to my long presentation. I appreciate you all. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. And so,
Thanks, everybody. Hey, Mark, you a grandpa?
It's the smile.
you're still muted.
Going his eyes.
Almost, we're getting close. We're on call. Hospital's about 10 minutes away, so we're close.
All right.
I hope everything goes well.
right.
Congratulations.
Yeah, yeah, we're wishing everybody the best, Mark.